When you stop being available to everyone, everything changes. Carl Jung observed that the parts of us we perform most fluently are often the parts we know least. Jung wrote in Volume 10 of his collected works, "In each of us, there is another whom we do not know." And he meant it plainly, that the person who answers every call, who shows up for every need, who is endlessly reachable, is not the whole of you. It is a shape you learnt to wear. And the ache you feel when you imagine disappointing someone is not proof that you are selfish for wanting to stop. It is the sound of a mask being asked to hold weight it was never built to carry. So before we go further, if this way of thinking is new to you, I would love for you to subscribe so that tomorrow's teaching finds you as well. The first key is this. The person who is available to everyone is wearing a persona, not a personality. Jung used the word persona deliberately, borrowing it from the masks worn by actors in the ancient theatre. A mask that lets the collective know what role you are playing. The reliable one, the one who always answers, the one who never says no. And he wrote that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. Notice what that sentence does. It does not condemn the mask. A mask is not a lie. It is a necessary negotiation with the world. You need a face to meet the office, the family gathering, the group chat that expects a reply within the hour. The failure is not in wearing it. The failure is in forgetting you put it on. Consider how ordinary this looks from the outside. A phone that lights up at any hour, and a hand that reaches for it before the mind even asks why. A calendar filled with other people's needs long before your own name ever appears on it. A sentence you have said so many times, it stopped feeling like a sentence and became a reflex. Of course, just let me know when. This is not cruelty toward yourself. It is craftsmanship. You built a mask so smooth and so useful that even you stopped seeing the seam where it meets your face. Imagine a woman who has answered every text within minutes for 15 years. At first it was kindness, then it became her reputation, then it was simply muscle memory. She does not experience this as a choice anymore, she experiences it as who she is. And that is the exact moment the mask stopped being a garment and became a second skin. The tragedy is not that she wears it, the tragedy is that she has forgotten there is a face underneath, still waiting, patiently, to be asked one honest question. What do you actually want? Not what does the room need from you. What do you want? So speak this small resolution with me. I will wear the mask. I will not become it. I will wear the mask. I will not become it. The second key is this. Identification with the persona is what Jung actually called the disease. Not the mask itself. He gave the example of the professor, who over years becomes so fused with his textbook that he can no longer speak except in its language. Even at his own dinner table, even to his own children, he wrote in his collected works that this fusion produces an artificial personality, and that the danger is you can carry it without immediate punishment, which is precisely why it is dangerous. There is no sharp pain the day you become only the available one. There is only a slow flattening, and notice the word he chose, artificial, not evil, not sinful, simply not real, a personality assembled to meet demand rather than grown from the whole of you. And the terrible convenience of it is that nobody around you objects, because the world loves a person who has fused with their usefulness. The always available one is praised at every turn, thanked, relied upon, called a rock, and praise is the last thing that will ever alert you to a disease. In fact, praise is often how the fusion is sealed. Each thank you a small stitch, binding the mask closer to the skin, until the two cannot be told apart, even by the person wearing them. Imagine a man everyone in his family calls the strong one, the one you call at 3 in the morning, the one who fixes it. For 30 years he answers, and he wears this so completely that when at last he retires, when the calls slow because the children have grown and the crisis has passed, he does not feel relief. He feels as though a room in the house of himself has gone dark, because the strong one, the always available one, was never a role he played. It had become the only room he lived in. And consider too the ordinary version of this same collapse. The woman who has been the reliable one at every job for 2 decades, who cannot take a sick day without composing 3 apologetic messages first, who feels a genuine jolt of dread at the thought of an unanswered inbox. Ask her who she is apart from being needed, and watch the pause before she answers. That pause is the professor unable to speak outside his textbook. That pause is the disease Jung named, a person who is a role and nothing behind the role. And here is a smaller, quieter version of the same picture. A man at a dinner table who is asked a simple question, "How are you?" and finds that the only sentence available to him is a report on what he has done for others that week. Busy helping my brother move, busy covering a shift, busy sorting out my daughter's schedule. He is not lying. He genuinely cannot locate an answer that is only about himself. The vocabulary for that answer has quietly gone unused for so long, it no longer comes when called. This is not a story of weakness. It is a story of a persona that ate its owner one polite yes at a time. And the frightening part is how reasonable each single yes looked on the day it was given. No single answered message, no single extra task, no single night spent being the reliable one, ever feels like the moment the disease took hold. It is only in looking back across years that the shape becomes visible. A life fully occupied, and a person nowhere to be found inside it. So speak this with me. I am larger than the role I perform. I am larger than the role I perform. The third key is this. Every hour you spend fully occupied by the mask of availability is an hour subtracted from the parts of you the mask cannot use. And those parts do not politely wait. Jung wrote in his 7th volume that identifying with the persona produces an artificial personality, sustained without punishment for a long while, and then, quietly, at cost. The cost is usually paid by whatever in you was never useful to the role, your capacity for stillness, for an opinion nobody asked for a no that serves no one but you. These do not vanish. They go where everything unused goes, into the shadow, and it is worth being precise about what that means. The shadow is not a dramatic underworld full of villains. Most of the time, it is simply a drawer where you have been quietly filing away every impulse that did not fit the schedule of the always available one. Imagine a woman who used to write in a journal every night before bed. Nothing important, just her own thoughts sorted onto a page. And slowly, as more people learned they could reach her at any hour, the journal moved from nightly to weekly to a box in a closet she has not opened in 4 years. She did not decide to stop. No single day carries the blame. It was subtracted one interruption at a time. The way a coastline is not destroyed in a single storm, but worn down by 10,000 ordinary tides. And here is the practical test. Ask yourself this week, when was the last time I said something true that was inconvenient to say? When was the last time I let a message sit unanswered simply because I wanted to? When was the last time boredom was allowed to sit in a room with me instead of being filled instantly by someone else's need? If the honest answer is, you cannot remember, that is not a character flaw. That is data. It is telling you the mask has been running the calendar for a long time. And there is a second angle worth sitting with. The shadow does not simply store what you neglect. It grows more insistent the longer it waits, which is why the unused parts of a life have a way of returning as irritability, as a strange exhaustion no amount of sleep repairs, as a resentment toward people you love that seems to come from nowhere but is really coming from a very specific somewhere. Imagine a father who prides himself on being the one every neighbor can call for a favor, who has quietly stopped noticing that his own Saturday mornings, the ones he once spent painting badly and happily in the garage, disappeared 3 years ago, and he never marked the funeral. He still tells people his life is full, and by the measure of the calendar it is, every hour accounted for, every request answered. But fullness of schedule and fullness of self are not the same arithmetic. One can be entirely occupied and entirely absent from one's own life at the same time. This is the quiet arithmetic of the persona. It does not steal loudly. It borrows a little every day and never gives it back. and the interest compounds in silence. So speak this with me. What I have not lived is still waiting for me. What I have not lived is still waiting for me. The fourth key is this, and here the lens turns toward you specifically, because it is easy to nod along about the tired father or the retired strong one and quietly exempt yourself. So ask plainly, when did you learn that being available was the price of belonging? Most people did not choose this mask in adulthood. They inherited it, long before they had language for what they were agreeing to, in a family with an anxious parent, in a childhood where love arrived only after usefulness was proven, in a house where the quiet child was praised and the demanding child was punished. You built a persona out of necessity, and it worked. That is the trap. It worked. It got you love, or at least it got you peace, or at least it got you left alone, instead of shouted at. And a strategy that once saved you is very hard to question later, because some part of you still believes that if you stop performing it, the original danger will return. This is not weakness. It is intelligence, adapting to an old room. And the tragedy is that the room no longer exists, but the adaptation still runs the whole house. Think about how quietly this gets installed. No one sits a child down and explains the arrangement. It happens in glances. In which version of you gets a warm response, and which version gets silence? Imagine a boy who learned that when he needed nothing, his mother's face softened, and when he needed something, her face tightened. Just slightly, just enough. He was perhaps 5 years old when he learned to read that face better than he could read his own hunger. And he built, without ever deciding to, a small permanent department inside himself, whose only job was to scan a room for tension and offer usefulness before the tension could form. That boy grew into an adult who reads every request, every text, every raised eyebrow, as a chance to make a face soften again, and 40 years later he calls this his personality. He calls it being a good person. He calls it just who I am. But Jung would call it something more precise, a persona, formed under duress and never renegotiated, formed when you had no bargaining power, no other shelter, and no way to test whether the danger it protected you from was still even in the room. And here is the part that is easy to miss. The strategy does not stay the size it was when you built it. A 5-year-old's solution to an anxious mother becomes, unexamined, a 40-year-old's solution to a difficult boss, a demanding friend, a needy sibling. The mask simply keeps getting handed new rooms to guard, and it guards them all with the same childhood vigilance. Because it was never updated, it was never told the emergency ended. Ask yourself honestly this week, whose face were you originally trying to soften? Was it a parent? Was it a teacher? Was it an older sibling whose moods ran the household weather? And is that person even present in the rooms you are protecting now? Because very often the answer is no. The original face is decades gone, and you are still performing the mask for an audience that left the theater long ago. This is not a call to blame the parent or rewrite the childhood. Jung was never interested in that kind of accusation. He was interested in consciousness, in simply seeing the mechanism clearly enough that it stops running on autopilot. The question is not whether the mask was useful once. It clearly was. It may have been the only thing standing between you and something you could not have survived alone as a child. The question is only whether you are still paying rent on an apartment you moved out of decades ago, whether the bill keeps arriving out of habit long after the lease ended. So speak this with me. The mask that once protected me does not have to run my whole life. The mask that once protected me does not have to run my whole life. The fifth key is this. When you actually stop being available to everyone, something happens that surprises almost no one who has read Jung, and almost everyone who has not. The people around you do not simply adjust. Some of them react as though you have betrayed a contract they did not know they had with you. And this is worth understanding slowly rather than resenting quickly, because a persona is never worn alone. It is negotiated. It is a social agreement stitched together over years without either party ever reading the terms aloud, which means the people around you have been relying on your mask as part of their own quiet arrangement with the world. The friend who calls you at midnight has built a small habit around your reliability. The colleague who hands you the extra task without asking has built a small expectation around your yes. The sibling who never has to plan ahead has built an entire sense of safety around the fact that you will simply be there. When the mask changes shape, even slightly, their world shifts too, and their unease is not proof that you have done something wrong. It is proof that the mask was load-bearing for more people than just you. Imagine an ordinary Tuesday, a woman who has answered every family emergency within the hour for a decade, small ones and large ones. And one week, she turns her phone face down during a single afternoon meeting and does not see 3 messages until evening. Nothing catastrophic occurs, and yet by the time she calls back, her sister's voice has an edge in it that has nothing to do with the actual afternoon and everything to do with a feeling that the ground moved. This is worth sitting with. The ground did not move. Only one afternoon of unavailability occurred, but the reaction is sized to something much larger, and that mismatch, that disproportion between the small event and the large reaction, is the signal that you have found a beam, not a splinter. The reliable mask had quietly become the structure holding up someone else's sense of order, and now you can see it plainly. You were never simply answering a phone, you were holding up a wall for a household that had stopped noticing the wall was even there. This does not mean the wall was wrong to build. Walls are useful. Families need someone dependable, the way houses need a foundation. But it means you must stop mistaking their alarm for your evidence. Guilt loves to whisper that if someone is upset, you must have erred. Jung would ask you to separate those two things cleanly. The upset tells you about the arrangement, not about your worth inside it. Consider too how this plays out quietly at work. The employee who has never once said a task was too much finds that the moment she does, a manager who was perfectly reasonable a week earlier suddenly seems wounded, almost betrayed, as though a machine had unexpectedly spoken back. This is not because the manager is cruel, it is because the persona had been doing invisible labor for the whole system, smoothing over gaps that were never actually hers to smooth. And when the smoothing stops, the gaps become visible again, and everyone in the room must feel them for the first time. This is uncomfortable for everyone, and discomfort is not the same thing as harm. The goal was never to abolish the persona. Jung was clear that a persona is necessary. Civilized life could not function without one. No family, no office, no friendship survives entirely without some agreed mask worn at the door. The goal is to wear it consciously, to know precisely where the mask ends and you begin, so that when the sibling's voice sharpens, or the manager's face falls, you can meet it with steadiness, instead of an automatic apology. You can hold the line quietly. This happened. I am still here. And let their unease be theirs to carry, rather than absorbing it as new evidence of your failure. So speak this with me. Their discomfort is not my verdict. Their discomfort is not my verdict. The 6th key is the practice itself, and Jung's own life gives us the clearest picture of what conscious mask-wearing can look like. He wrote in his memoirs of 2 figures within himself that he came to call No One and No Two. No One was the schoolboy, later the doctor, the public man who did homework, wore proper clothes, answered letters on time, met social expectation exactly as it was required, and No Two was older, quieter, unbothered by the century he happened to be born into, a figure closer to what he called his own inner truth. And here is the part most retellings leave out. Jung did not treat No Two as the real one and No One as the fake one. He needed both. No One paid for his education and saw his patients and kept his household running. No Two kept him from becoming only that. The discipline was never choosing a side. The discipline was learning which one was speaking at which moment, and refusing to let either one answer mail meant for the other. Think of it this way: a persona is not a lie you tell. It is closer to a coat you keep in the hallway closet. You put it on to go outside because the weather demands it. The mistake is sleeping in the coat, wearing it to bed, forgetting there is a body underneath that also needs to breathe without it. The always available one is a coat cut for cold weather, useful in an emergency, exhausting as a permanent garment. And the strange thing about coats worn too long is that eventually you forget you can take them off at all. You simply think, this is what warmth feels like. This is what a body feels like. So take an evening this week and do what might be called a mask census. Nothing dramatic, just a page and a pen. Write down plainly the roles you perform, the reliable one at work, the peacemaker in the family group chat, the friend who is always free for a call at any hour, the parent who has never once said I am too tired tonight. And beside each one, write honestly what it costs you to keep it running, not what it gives to others. That column is usually flattering, and you already know it by heart. Write instead what it costs you. Sleep, honesty, a Saturday, an opinion you swallowed at dinner. This is not an accusation against the roles. Some of them are worth their price entirely. A persona worn with awareness is simply good citizenship. The trouble was never the mask itself. The trouble was forgetting you were the one wearing it. Imagine a man who runs this census and discovers, almost embarrassed by how obvious it now looks on paper, that he has not told anyone in his family he does not want to talk on the phone for 3 separate evenings. Not because those evenings held anything, but because he could not locate the sentence, "I would rather not tonight," anywhere inside himself. The sentence had simply gone missing years ago. This is what identification with the persona actually does. It does not just tire you, it deletes vocabulary. Whole phrases disappear from your possible speech because the mask never needed them. So here is the practical experiment. Ask yourself which single mask you could set down for one day this week without the house actually falling in. Not forever, not as a grand declaration, just one day. And then set it down for that one day only. Tell one person plainly that you are not available on a particular evening, with no explanation folded into the sentence, no apology stapled to the front of it, just the fact stated once and left alone. And then notice, carefully, without judgment, what does and does not happen afterward. In nearly every case that has ever been tried, far less happens than the mask convinced you it would. The sky holds. The family survives an evening without you. The office does not collapse. And something quieter than either of those outcomes happens too. You notice, for one day, who is standing behind the coat, waiting, patiently, the way no two waited inside Jung for decades, before he gave him a name and a room to speak in. This is not abandonment of the mask. You will put the coat back on tomorrow, and rightly so. The goal was never to walk into winter bare. The goal was to remember, each time you put it on, that you are the one doing the putting on. So speak this with me. I choose the mask now. It no longer chooses me. I choose the mask now. It no longer chooses me. Here is the whole picture. The persona is a mask negotiated with the world, and it is necessary, not shameful. Identification with that mask is the actual disease, not the mask itself. Every hour spent fused with the role of the always available one is an hour subtracted from the rest of you, and that unused rest does not disappear. It waits in shadow. Most of us inherited the mask young, in rooms where usefulness bought love, and stopping does not simply free you, it disturbs an arrangement others quietly built around your reliability, and their discomfort is not your verdict to carry. The practice, learned slowly the way Jung learned to know his own no one from his own no two, is to wear the mask with open eyes, to set it down deliberately from time to time, and to notice, without needing to abolish anything, that there was always someone standing behind it, waiting patiently to be recognized. When you stop being available to everyone, the world does not end. It simply remembers you were never only the mask to begin with. And that is worth sitting with quietly tonight.